I'm Fran Benton, and I'm standing in one of the rarest environments in British Columbia, a Garry Oak meadow. These meadows are one of the most endangered environments in British Columbia. It's estimated that there are only 1 to 5% of the original meadows left, and of those, 1/2 of 1% are actually protected. What is a Garry Oak meadow, and why is it so unique?
Well, Garry Oak meadows are actually coastal grasslands, and that's a good way to think about them because they are the places that are dry, sunny, well-drained, nice sort of exposure, views out to the sea. In fact, if you think about a Garry Oak ecosystem as the place that everybody wants to live, you'll have a good sense of where they are. If you look at Garry Oak ecosystems relative to Canada, it is one of the most endangered ecosystems in Canada. These northern extremities of more southerly ecosystems are right at the border of Canada. And so when viewed in the context of Canada, these are really, really rare and really endangered ecosystems because, not surprisingly, just like all the species like living in these warm, dry, lovely places, so do people. The same thing is happening all through the United States. People have moved into Garry Oak areas. So the Garry Oak ecosystem is being threatened throughout its range.
What's important to understand about Garry Oak ecosystems is that they're so well adapted to the environment that they actually have their dormancy period in the summer, because that's the harshest conditions. When you think about the rest of the Canada, you know, it's winter, right, where plants would be dormant. But for these plants over here on the west coast, what happens is they actually start growing in the fall when the rains come. And that's when they're triggered. And so much happens under the soil or from dormant buds. And those bulbs that are underneath the soil already have little stalks, you know, good 2 inches high already. And then they pop up around February and March, those little bulb plants like the camas and the fawn lilies. And then they really come on strong in May. It gets a little bit warm, the rains die off, and then that's when the conditions get a little harsher. And they say, we're going to pull back, we're going to go into some dormancy for a few months and wait it out until those fall rains come back and the days get a little bit cooler. The Garry Oak environment is so amazing the way it works because it is very different than the other environments in Canada.
So what happens in a grassland is that the soil builds up in a much different way than you would in a forest. You get the decaying of grasses and flowers over time, and they build up a much richer soil. So you get a soil horizon that's much like you would, say, in the prairies, where you get black earth, and it's full of organic material, and it's rich. It's actually agricultural. These are soils that are very distinct from the well-leached rainforest soils, which is largely just rain seeping through them, and there isn't a lot of, you've got mostly just coarse woody debris, but in the Garry Oak meadow, it's lovely, rich, black earth.
As they age, Garry Oaks can sustain a lot of damage. The holes and splits in the trunks can be a convenient habitat for plants and small animals. Arbutus, or Pacific madrone, shares the oak's range from southern British Columbia through Washington, Oregon, and California. In moist rocky outcrops in the meadows, lichen, moss, and fern cover the rocks and provide habitat for small animals such as Pacific tree frogs and rough-skinned newts. On the tops of rocky outcrops, northern alligator lizards and garter snakes bask in the sun. These sunny meadows were the gardens of First Nations people.
So Garry Oak meadows and First Nations actually can't be separated. They are the gardens of people that gardened them for thousands of years. In fact, there's there's a lot of evidence to suggest a lot of these species co-evolve to some extent. At least they co-evolve with some kind of disturbance regime. And by disturbance regime, I mean fire, digging, that kind of sort of going in there and shuffling earth around and spreading fire. As far as First Nations are concerned, on Vancouver Island, it's very clear that these were culturally modified landscapes. They kept these grassland openings open with fire and with digging and with weeding in the face of changing climatic conditions. So for example, as the Douglas fir forest was kind of closing in, people were burning to keep the Douglas fir from encroaching more in. We might have just been looking at salal and Douglas fir if it hadn't been for thousands of years of people maintaining these as important crops and keeping them burned for grazing. In Vancouver Island there was elk and deer and all sorts of browsing animals which were really important prey, and the grasslands fed them. People kept these coastal grasslands open with fire for browsing and for root crops.
The blue camas lily bulb was an important food source for First Nations people. When the cultivated camas fields in the Garry Oak meadows were dormant, the community would harvest some of the bulbs. A pit fire was prepared by burning wood down to hot coals. A layer of salal leaves and swordfern fronds were placed over the coals, and the bulbs were put on top of the fern fronds. Water was poured in to create steam and to build heat. All of this was covered in a layer of sod. The bulbs were left in the pit to roast until tender. First Nations people valued camas as an important food source. These camas fields survive today if they are protected by levels of government or nature trusts. One municipal government leads the way in its progressive attitude to Garry Oak meadows. That municipality is Saanich.
Well, Saanich's vision is for the community to be safe and affordable, a place where people can come and live and work and play and raise a family, but also to be sustainable. Environmentally sensitive areas are treasured, and they're part of the culture of the organization no matter what the department. So whether we're dealing with planning and parks or engineering, it's a key factor to be considered in all decisions. We are a pro-growth municipality. We're in a regional growth strategy. The word growth is in the strategy. So we allow growth, and we allow and in fact encourage redevelopment so that parts of our community don't grow old or haggard. In doing that, you have challenges in terms of where's the trees, where's the environmentally sensitive areas. Sprawl has not occurred within Saanich as it has in so many hundreds of other municipalities across Canada and North America. The development has been within a boundary, and that's why we deal with infill every week and every day at Saanich, not sprawl.
We're probably not different with respect to our objectives in the environment, but Saanich has had for a couple of decades now a strong environmental services section. And we have registered biologists on staff, and we have environmental education staff who work with, say, Swan Lake and various conservation groups in the community. So, well, probably the most important thing the OCP does, and the local area plans that are within the OCP, it recognizes and designates all those valuable habitats, and in sync with the Natural Areas Atlas, it allows people to flag those when development applications come forward. When something comes before council, you can consult the OCP and say, this is an important area, we need to do something to protect it. And that's the main role of the OCP, to flag it and have policies that say this is important, do something to protect that area. One thing that we would like to do more is to preserve the intact understory and the tree canopy at the same time. But certainly by flagging Garry Oaks as a protected tree, it has certainly preserved that species far more than it would have if the bylaw had not been in place. The majority of the Garry Oak meadows in Saanich are in private lands, and that's a very important part of our work, is to encourage stewardship by individual residents. Residents who are concerned about either restoring habitat that's maybe got lawns on it, or in fact preserving habitat that is decent now, can certainly consult with various groups. Saanich environmental staff and park staff are very happy when people come to them and say, I have a 200 square foot patch I want to rehabilitate, or a 2,000 square foot patch. It doesn't matter. The staff are out there and they would love to see people do this. We'll provide seedlings, we'll provide suggestions where they can get native plants. We'll even put them in touch with the restoration people. There's all sorts of support out there if there's a willingness on the part of the public.
Swan Lake Christmas Hill Nature Sanctuary has a special place in the culture of Saanich. The summit of Christmas Hill is a 10-acre Garry Oak meadow.
I think we're very fortunate to be in the municipality of Saanich because the municipal council from the 1960s on has been very supportive of the concept of an educational nature sanctuary and of preserving the lands. Much of the hill was covered with Scotch broom in the 80s, and we've been trying to control it ever since. We just didn't recognize in those days what a huge threat to the ecosystem Scotch broom was going to be. The broom then comes in and creates a situation where nothing else will grow underneath it. Getting rid of the broom is a real challenge in that it's a very, very long-term project. The seed bank from the broom plants stays viable in the soil for up to 20 to 24, 25 years. Every year for that period of time in an area that's been infested with broom, you have to come back and take out the seedlings. And that was part of the strategy, was to try and enlist as much help as we could from community volunteers. The other strategy was to remove the mature flowering broom, not taking more of an area that we could maintain, because every year after that you have to go back and remove the seedlings. One of the other major changes over the past 30 years of managing this area is the amount of residential building surrounding the hill, where it used to be sloping, grassy, wildflower fields extending from the nature sanctuary down towards the highway. And the pressures on Christmas Hill will be felt in the long term, just in terms of sheer numbers of people that want to come and enjoy this area. What we need to do is to try and educate the neighbors about the value of this ecosystem and to try and get them to help us protect it.
As long as property prices keep escalating, there's going to be huge conflict. And usually the rhetoric of the development industry is to say, come on, share the meadows. We can have these, the term that I hate, win-win situations. So what we're left with is a moral battle of people that are trying to save these areas and a fiercely aggressive development industry. But I usually counter most of those arguments of win-win situations saying, you know something, the compromise has already gone on. You've already won 99% of the areas. We're down to the last 1%, and you're asking us to compromise over the last 1%. You know, in my vocabulary, sharing the land is 50-50. And even if we could apply a human term like sharing to an ecosystem, then, you know, 50-50 might work, but the reality is that ecosystems don't operate. That you can't compromise systems. They're either going to work or they're not. You can't drive a bulldozer through a grassland and stick a house there and think it's going to just keep functioning with any kind of integrity. We're down to the last little bits. We've won a few battles and we've lost many. We've had a most amazing heroes in the way of, you know, the odd municipal councillor here and or the regional director here, who've really tried hard to bring some what I would call balance into the discussion. But when you're up against million-dollar properties and an ethic of the highest and best use of land being development, then you're going to find every single obstacle thrown at you. And like Robert Bateman was saying, you know what, I call myself a conservative. I'm a conservative with a small c. I want to conserve something for the future. Where the battles are being won is over neighbors' fences. People are able to persuade their neighbors now not to cut down that tree, not to plow up that camas meadow, not to destroy that beautiful little patch of oaks and camas that's in between a junction and has been forgotten by the city council. Those are these little tiny incremental steps that to me are just the hope of the future. You know, when the glaciers moved through Canada, they were like bulldozers. They were like the development industry. They just came in there and they flattened the place. But every time a bulldozer goes through or a glacier goes through, they always miss little places. And these are called refugia. And what members of the public are doing is that they are creating refugia all over Victoria and the Capital Regional District. They're rescuing plants here, they're planting them in their backyards, they're creating covenants, they're fighting to save little tiny areas. And who knows how important those species are going to be in the future, because they might be the very individuals that go out and repopulate a landscape that is getting hammered by climate change. And so as we lose our Douglas firs or we lose various other species, those little refugia that people have saved may well be the things that repopulate an entire landscape.
It's late November now, and this Garry Oak meadow is dormant. What message does this environment give us? Perhaps to be more conservative with our physical resources, or maybe to be more resourceful with where we put our energies. Of all Western Canadian environments, the Garry Oak meadow's survival will demonstrate our success or failure to coexist with the land. But maybe you just don't care. That would be a great pity. After all,